This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello, everyone. It's the last Friday of the month, which means I'm back with my latest show. This week, I'm taking a deep dive into maths. What are the issues facing the subject across from reception right up to A-level? And how can teachers best ensure that students are progressing effectively in this subject? Stay tuned for what should be an interesting conversation on these issues and more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Brown. It's great to be back. I hope you've had an awesome Easter, or you might still be on holidays, so I'm very jealous. So tonight I'm looking at maths. The EEF report published last year highlighted recruitment as the major issue facing the subject. Other issues raised by the Maths Horizon project published this year relate to teachers not having sufficient time to master curriculum content, and that there's too much incentive to prioritise exam skills over deeper maths competencies. The report also noted that enjoyment of maths drops relatively steadily over time, especially during the transitions from Key Stages 1 to 2 and Key Stages 4 to Post-16. So to discuss this and more, I'm going to be talking to three educators in maths across the Key Stages from primary to secondary to A-level. And my first guest, who I'm hoping is here, is Phil Hurd. Phil, can you hear me?
I can, Dave. Hello, and thank you for having me on tonight.
Brilliant. You're coming through nice and clear. So can you just introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them about your background and current role?
Yes, so I'm currently an associate head teacher at Transform Trust, and we are a trust in the East Midlands, predominantly Nottingham City, but we now have half a dozen 7 schools in Derby City and some in Nottingham, Derbyshire as well. I have kind of oversight of maths for the trust. We've got 27 primary schools, and it's kind of my role to kind of teaching in maths across the trust.
Okay, cool. So, so how long have you been teaching maths for, Phil?
So, well, I've been a teacher for 25 years, but then through fortuitous circumstances, I initially did the maths specialist teacher training in 2010, and from there, shortly afterwards, the governments of various times have put money into maths education, and I've just been riding that wave kind of ever since, really. And then I've done the mastery specialism. So I've been teaching maths for 25 years, and I've been kind of specialising in it for sort of 15 years.
Okay, so let's sort of jump straight into it. What would you say are the biggest challenges facing your particular key stages in maths at the moment?
So I think at the minute we've got kind of changing demographics of in our schools. So we've got a greater proportion of pupils who require one-to-one support for various reasons. And that means that the traditional role of the teaching assistant, who was maybe a classroom support, they are now more focused on just 1 or 2 pupils in the classroom. And they may not even be in the classroom. Some of the needs are that they need to be out of the classroom. And that means that the traditional role, the traditional way the teacher has managed those teaching assistants and deploying them across sort of maybe 7 or 8 pupils, whether they be, at whatever level, is no longer possible. So we're having to really kind of rethink how that is managed. So that is definitely one challenge that's currently faced. We've also got a challenge in terms of the population bubble of pupils, I think, is currently in about year 9. So we have over the last couple of years within primary education, we have seen that there has been an increasing number of schools reverting back to mixed aged classes. And whilst that is okay for the majority of subjects, it makes it very difficult for the teaching of maths, which is kind of sequential in its nature. And at the minute, I feel there has been a bit of a lack of training available to teachers on how best to approach that conundrum.
It's really interesting. I just want to pick up on that one a little bit. So you said maybe it's okay for other subjects. Why do you think distinctly in maths the mixed stage classes are more problematic?
So, I mean, there are some some domains within maths where it is manageable. For instance, the first 3 weeks of most primary school teaching in September in maths is around place value, and that's reasonably straightforward to manage because you can ask the same questions. You effectively just stick an extra zero on the question, and you move it along the place value column. But others, you need to know knowledge A in order to access knowledge B, and trying to manage that situation where, if you're teaching year 3-4 mix, and you're trying to teach to the year 4 curriculum, there may be certain elements of the year 4 curriculum that is built upon what they have known in the year 3 curriculum. And so it's trying to make sure that the year 3 children see access to their curriculum at the same time as the year 4 children can see theirs. Now, that has traditionally been it's been managed by use of additional adults in the classroom. But as I sort of mentioned, because of the increasing number of children with SEND needs, that has had an impact on that model for delivering to a mixed age class.
So you spoke previously about yourself, and you were saying how you did the maths specialism.
Yes.
What is the situation in primary schools at the moment in terms of that? In terms of recruitment and maths specialism? I mean, what's the picture looking like in your MAT across the country, if you can talk about that, in terms of that as a particular issue? How much did it help you, and how much is it lacking, do you think, in terms of maths teaching? Or is it something that's actually, improving across the country?
So what is interesting is that I'd been teaching kind of 9 years before I did my maths specialism, and I was part of, it was a kind of a year-long training involving residentials, and it was kind of master's level learning. And I'd come home from these sessions and talk to my wife, who's an A-level maths teacher, and I would be talking about my eyes being opened as to the best way of teaching maths, and she'd be looking at it and she said, "Well, what did you learn?" I said, "Well, you do this, you do." She said, "Well, yes, that's just what we do. That's just good maths teaching." And I'm like, "Well, yes, but us primary school teachers, for whatever reason, we didn't know that." And so that was, as I said, that was back in 2010. I think there has been a marked shift in initial teacher training on that. I think there's been professional development opportunities through the NCETM that have put that things like proper professional development into place. So I think we're in a better place than we've ever been, but I still think that we lack for a good number of teachers who have a real deep pedagogical understanding of how we go about teaching. And I think we've almost kind of reached we made rapid improvements since Curriculum 2014, and since the introduction of the Maths Hub, the NCTM. I think all that has done fantastic work. I just now wonder, and I have no empirical evidence, but I just now wonder if we are we kind of reached a plateau, and we now need to think about what's next.
Can you just explain to our listeners a little bit more about the Maths Hub? Because this has come up a lot in my reading and research for this program. And it keeps saying about how, I mean, if you look at any government report, they're very proud of the Maths Hub. And you just mentioned it then. But could you just elaborate a little bit more, Phil, on what the Maths Hub is?
Yes, so you have the National Centre for the Excellence of Teaching Mathematics, the NCTM, are the kind of the umbrella body. And then underneath that, they kind of manage these maths hubs that serve reasonably large regions. So the one I'm involved in is the East Midlands West, and that involves, and I hope my bosses who might listen to this, they forgive me for missing an area or two, but it's Nottingham City, Derby City, most of Derbyshire, most of Nottinghamshire. But then, so we've got quite a big geographical area in the East Midlands, but you also then have the East Midlands South that is out of Minster School in Southwell, or Southwell, depending on where you're from. And so up and down the country, you have these regional centres of excellence and within there, they kind of employ specialists at primary and secondary level to support the development of maths teaching from early years right through to post 16.
So a couple of questions in terms of actually teaching maths at primary school and some of the issues that you've identified. One of the big things coming out of the Ofsted report is that maths is a communication subject and about procedural knowledge and being so important. Now, I know that in conversations, with parents and those aspects of people wondering, why is procedural knowledge so important? What does it matter how the student gets to a certain answer? Why is it taught in a certain way? So what are the choices you make in terms of procedural knowledge, and why is it so important that all students stick to this, even if there may be different ways to get to certain answers?
So what we kind of aim for is that in terms of understanding, there's a kind of a procedural understanding and a conceptual understanding. Now, when I was at secondary school in the 90s, it was very much procedural understanding, and I could knock out a procedures every day of the week. But I didn't really understand why certain things happened. So what happened was I had a choice when I came to do my GCSEs, and that choice was take the higher paper and kind of shoot for an A, or take the intermediate paper and pretty much be guaranteed a B. And because of the nature I took the easy option, and I just took a B. And that was because I knew I didn't have that deep conceptual understanding of the mathematics behind the procedures. So what we try and teach now is the kind of the procedures alongside the conceptual understanding. So why something, if we think about, language that non-maths teachers might understand, that kind of borrowing when we're doing column subtraction or exchanging, as it's called now. I could do that procedure, but I didn't necessarily understood why we kind of exchanged a 10 for 10 ones. And so what we try and do is marry the two together to allow the children to be able to make deep conceptual links within mathematics. And in terms of kind of learning procedures, that still kind of lingers a little bit toward, because ultimately we are judged on our year 6 results. And there comes a time where you just need to say to the children, do this and you will get the outcome. And that has reduced, actually, to be fair. The importance of the SATs results has diminished in terms of not mass, not loads, but in terms of Ofsted, there is less importance on the ultimate year 6 outcomes, and they take in a lot more factors other than that these days, which is good. But ultimately, you still need the children to pass an exam, and therefore we sometimes do just say, do this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a big question, isn't it? But how do teachers avoid just teaching for the exam and teaching that deeper knowledge they might need at GCSE or into embed maths, or is it just an impossible challenge?
No, and I think what's happened is we've had some published schemes which have massively helped. So within primary education, there are three over predominant. The most important, the three mostly important schemes are Power Maths, which is my personal favourite. You have White Rose, which is probably the biggest, and then you have Maths No Problem, which is the original. And in terms of teaching the children that conceptual understanding and the sequencing of learning, so that today I'm teaching this, which leads onto that tomorrow, which leads onto that, and then all that kind of stuff is very much taken care of by those three big schemes. And it has made a massive difference to the teaching of maths. It means that what I would teach in year 3, I know is building on what they learnt in year 2. Whereas prior to this kind of more coordinated approach, which came out of Curriculum 2014, really, what that more coordinated approach, what used to happen is the year 2 teacher would almost teach their favourite procedures. I would then teach my favourite procedures, and what happens is it then becomes a memory game, and those children who have good memories do well. Whereas what we now know about how we learn and, kind of making connections and building on schema, I think we're doing a much better job of that now because of this approach.
That's super interesting. So we're going to go to the first ad break, and when I come back, I'm just going to be chatting with Phil a bit more about the issues at primary school.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit AxiomMaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Cool, and we're back. So my next question, Phil, is what would you say are the biggest definers of success in mathematics at primary school?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, what's interesting is I think we have. I've been talking to our teachers about this recently. That one of the perhaps the biggest defining characteristic of success is whether a child gets a scale score of 100 in year 6. And actually, what I was having an issue with was that we've had this push on greater depth. You know, we've got to this level of about 65% of our children get into age-related expectations, but we weren't quite matching that in some of our schools in terms of greater depth. And again, greater depth was measured by whether they got a scaled score of 115 or not. And actually, to me, what we have is children who can score 115, but who are not necessarily greater depth, in my opinion. And if I can just illustrate it with that, I remember watching a Year 4 lesson, and the teacher was doing a lesson that was a multiplication lesson, and there was a word problem on the board. And this was maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and the prevailing methodology at the time was that teachers send off the greater depth pupils to kind of work on their own without any input from the teacher. And that's what this teacher did, because it was the expectation from the school. And the problem, it was a word problem. The maths ultimately the maths was 23 times 6. And these 6 children went off and they tried to work it out, and they wrote down 20 times 6 and then 3 times 6, which, you know, great strategy. Mm-hmm. But every single one of these 6 children worked out 20 times 6 by doing 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120 on their fingers. And I was actually doing it on my fingers then, because I realized it's not great for radio. And they wrote down 120. They all just knew 6 times 3, so they wrote down 18, and then they added it together to get 138. The whole point of the lesson was to make that connection between 2 times 6 and 20 times 6. Now, to me, success is to get children to make the connections, to see that 2 times 6 and 20 times 6, there is that relationship. And I was working with some children yesterday who were preparing for their SATs exams, and I was given a small group who might be aiming for greater depth. And I can probably see, and I over the course of the afternoon, I think I had 12 pupils, and I can see that probably 8 of them will get that greater depth in terms of that 115 scaled score. But actually only 2 of them demonstrated to me that they had that kind of real mathematical clarity around making the connections, bringing in their knowledge from other domains of maths. And that, to me, is what would signify success. And that's the bit I think we're currently a long way from still in primary maths. So at the minute, it looks like a scale score of 115. And I'm oversimplifying for kind of comedic effect, perhaps. But ultimately, what I want to see are children who are able to make those connections between different areas of maths and understand when they can, you know, I can do this method, I can do that method, but actually that's the method that's most important in this particular example.
And would you say they're the most important skills also that you take on then to secondary school and obviously beyond and up to GCSE as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and what we've got is, you know, one of the wonderful things about maths is the kind of the transferable skills around problem solving, and I think what our children at the minute at primary is with, and I don't necessarily know what it's like at secondary, but we have too many children who at the moment aim for the answer to a problem. You know, they just want to solve an algorithm. But actually, that idea of desirable struggle, not being able to solve the problem straight away, but thinking, okay, well, I know this and I know that, so I can use it to work out what I don't know. I think we need to kind of build that in to our maths curriculum to give the children the opportunity to think critically, to problem solve. You mentioned oracy earlier, you know, that chance to talk a problem through, to collaborate. And I absolutely think they are the skills that will be needed, you know, in key stage 3, 4, 5, and then into the world of work as well.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that. So this idea that kept coming up in the reports that I read, that maths is a communication subject. Said teachers really believe this. Just to explain to the listeners, and I guess myself a bit more, what do you take from that? What does it mean that maths is a communication subject?
So it's interesting. One of your, perhaps as a primary school teacher, one of your default phrases is turn to your partner and talk to your partner about this, that, and the other. And that's especially so in maths. Talk about how you did this. Is your method better than the other? And I think maths has been, because you mentioned earlier that there are, why do we teach them this procedure over that? And I think there is a great opportunity to try and convince your partner or convince anybody that the method you have chosen is the most efficient. And why is that the case? Is one method better than the other? Why does your method not work in that particular example? And I think that's where at our level there is the idea of communication. As you go further up, you introduce the idea of proof, and being able to kind of convince and prove your argument requires a great level of communication to be able to say, my idea is absolutely bomb-proof because I've done this maths, and it just proves beyond doubt that I am correct. Now, we have a little bit of that in primary school, but it's at a very kind of introductory level.
Yeah. So it's super interesting. So my last question before we go to the news, I promised a friend I would ask this question, is why is geometry so important at primary school? So the Ofsted report said that too many schools were sidelining geometry, that it was getting sort of passed over as weekend homework. But it said, without really any explanation, geometry is core to maths at primary school. So a friend of mine was very interested in this. His son's at primary school, and he said, as a parent, he doesn't really understand why geometry is so important at primary school. So I promised him I'd ask this question. So why is that understanding of geometry so important, do you think, at primary school level?
I think because it involves the application of so many other aspects of maths. And I'm going to try and paint a picture, if you will allow me, before the news cuts in.
Yeah, of course.
I have a question from the 2023 paper, Year 6 paper, which is my go-to example at the minute. And I want you to imagine, and you might even have a piece of paper with you there, I want you to imagine a regular hexagon. And within that regular hexagon, you can imagine 6 triangles fitting inside it. And one of those triangles was coloured in. You then had a smaller triangle coloured in, and you were told that smaller triangle was half the size of the bigger triangle. And the question was, what fraction of the hexagon is coloured in? And the maths behind it is kind of year 4, year 5 maths. It was effectively 1/6 add 1/12. And had 1/6 add 1/12 been asked on paper 1, which is an arithmetic paper, you'd be looking at about 90% of children getting it right. But when it was presented in this hexagon form, it flummoxed so many children. I don't have the figure to hand, but I'm going to guess around 40% of children would get it right. So you had that kind of massive drop off, because you had to bring in your knowledge of other subjects and then other kind of domains, and you had to rely on the application. And if you think about area, area is a really, a straightforward multiplication question, but to understand that multiplication question, you have to understand the geometry around length times breadth. If you don't understand that, you can't apply the simple 5 times 4 of So I think that's one of the reasons why geometry is so important, because it does involve the application of the kind of fundamental knowledge that we would hope that children have.
Thanks so much, Phil. So thanks so much. We'll be coming back to Phil later on in the show. I'm going to go to the news, and after that, we'll be talking to Rob about secondary education.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly, face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit AxiomMaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio News, read by John Gibbs. For Friday, the 18th of April, 2025. This week, two perennial struggles are taking place, both identified by the Times Educational Supplement. The first, as many teachers will recognise, is the struggle to keep arts significant in the curriculum. Reporter Sam Eyre describes how the significance of arts and the struggle to keep it in the curriculum is becoming more significant under pressure from English and maths. This, as many teachers will know, is that debate between the hard subjects and the soft subjects, which continues. Also in the Times Education magazine, Charlotte Cooper asks schools not to respond too quickly to moral panics, such as the ones that might be in response to the programme on television, Adolescence, brilliant though it was. It pushes aside many other things that have to be accomplished in PSHE and demands again of schools that they should solve the problems of society. This time in The Guardian, a letter from Councillor Johnny Cranshaw, who describes the way in which multi-academy trusts are actually much more expensive and leech away millions in the salaries of executives and ancillary staff. His letter, right or wrong, continues the ongoing debate and re-evaluation in this country of the value and success of the multi-academy trust experiment. Also related to some of the perennial problems and questions that many people ask about schools was a thought-provoking article in The Guardian this week by Eva Wiseman. She asks, there certainly is a problem with attendance in schools at the moment. After the pandemic, it's really gone down significantly. Everyone agrees that this is the case. But should we be asking, what are schools for? Is this a symptom rather than a problem in itself? Is the problem something underlying, something that looks us in the face? Are these the schools, she asked, that Michael Gove built? Schools where the discourse is about delinquency, feckless parents, lazy students, and discipline. Should we be asking instead how we can make schools more receptive, more comfortable, more humane, for students of all kinds. Again, right or wrong, these may be things that we should certainly be asking ourselves. Sky News picked up on the Andrew Tate phenomena. Misogyny. Young boys as young as 10 barking at female teachers, blocking doorways, and so forth. Is this part of the moral panic? Is it real? Or is something very significant happening in our society that's generating a toxic masculinity that we should all be aware of? In support of the suggestion that this is a very significant problem, more than 5,800 teachers were polled as part of a survey by the NASUWT union. And nearly 59% said they believed that the use of social media had contributed to a deterioration in pupil behaviour. Returning to the theme this week of perennial questions, ones that any teacher with a lengthy career will recognise, was the online site Teacherhead, which asked, does subject knowledge matter more than teaching techniques? Is it important that a teacher should be an expert in their field? Their knowledge impress the students, the depth and understanding of their particular field? Or is the art of teaching something that relates to relationships with students, techniques in the classroom, structure of lessons and planning? Can brilliant people be poor teachers? Can brilliant teachers not know much about their subject? Well, as for perennial questions, I'm sure that question will go on. And finally, a major story in the news this week, covered in The Independent and by the BBC, are free school breakfast clubs. They provide 30 minutes of morning childcare and a breakfast, and the trial is taking place in 750 schools until July. This was an election promise by the Labour Party and is being carried through by the government. Critics wonder whether it's being properly funded, with many schools suggesting that the costs will fall on them. It is generally agreed, however, that a good start and a breakfast and a period of time where students can begin their day before the pressures of school starts is probably a good thing. In the 1960s, we were urged to go to work on an egg. Not such a bad idea. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs.
And we're back. Thanks to John for the news. So my next guest is Rob Burgess. Hopefully Rob can hear me. Rob, are you there?
Hi, Dave. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming through loud and clear. So would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners, please?
Yeah, so I'm Rob Burgess. So I am the secondary lead for a subject lead for maths for the Weydon Multi-Academy Trust, which is based in Hampshire and Surrey. And so it covers 13 schools, of which I generally work with the 6 secondary schools.
Okay, and so how long have you been teaching maths for, Rob?
So I've been teaching now for 17 years across Devon, Hampshire and Surrey. So quite a variety of different contexts over the years.
Cool. Is there anything you wanted to pick up on what Phil was saying about primary school? Obviously, in a trust your size, I'm assuming you get out to a lot of primary schools, or at least liaisoning with them in terms of progress and students coming into the schools in your trust.
Yeah, so it's always exciting to go into primary schools and to see what's going on. And it's also really interesting how he was talking as well about the mastery journey that the primaries have been on, which is currently where the secondaries are working our way through as well. So that journey that Phil was talking about from the mastery curriculum, which I've seen develop over my time in teaching, which is really coming through across the whole spectrum of the students' maths experience. And also the support that's coming out of the NCETM and through Maths Hubs that's really trying to develop teaching is really important, I think, in the maths curriculums at the moment. especially as we try and delve for that depth and the ideas of problem solving and the ideas of oracy, which Phil was talking about as well.
So, I mean, one of the things that the Ofsted report from 2023 said is that GCSE, particularly, or maths at secondary school, has been improving over the last 10 years. Is this something you would agree with?
Yeah, so I was sort of reflecting over my career. I also work with some of the trainee teachers, and the whole spectrum of how you were told to teach maths when I first started, it almost feels like a revolution has taken place in maths teaching over the last period of time. I remember when I first started teaching, you were given a textbook, told you've got 6 months, get on with it. And now there's much more depth in terms of professional development, in terms of talking through techniques, in terms of talking through pedagogy. I mean, I don't think I even knew the word pedagogy when I first started teaching, let alone talk about it every day. And so that whole step change of looking at topics in depth, talking about getting students to think deeper and conceptual understanding. When I first started teaching, you used to teach the technique just to pass. So it was a case of, I mean, I remember first taking my first GCSE class, and you got told that you had 5 opportunities for them to pass, put them in for every chance they could get, and see which one they can do. Whereas now there's much more emphasis on let's make sure that our students can do it as best as they possibly can, and whatever grade they can get at the end is the ideal.
What do you think's been behind that improvement?
So I think definitely some of the ideas coming out of government, which I dare to say has kind of forced that in some ways, in terms of only counting the first attempt, has got rid of the whole resit culture, which I think was really important. But also, I think the funding of Maths Hubs has fed into the teaching development as needed. But I think in terms of like multi-academy trusts and having roles such as I have now, that feeds into professional development, much more emphasis on that within teaching.
So what would you say now are the biggest issues facing secondary maths?
I think the biggest one that I don't think any maths teacher could fail to see is recruitment. We have a real problem of getting enough maths teachers into classrooms, and I think as well, not just having a physical body, but having the quality that the curriculum now needs in the classroom. So where that step change has happened and that understanding of conceptual understanding is needed, actually getting the quality of teachers that we need into the classrooms, not just even a math specialist, is really important. And in the opposite is kind of happening at the moment, where we're struggling to recruit teachers, and actually the amount of non-specialist teaching is going up and up and up.
So, I mean, one of the questions that actually came out of the news was this debate about subject knowledge versus teaching technique.
Yeah.
Would you say, obviously, I think a lot of subjects would say this, but in maths particularly, that subject knowledge trumps teaching technique to an extent, or you need both, but that subject knowledge needs to be, really strong in order to communicate it to the students?
I think there's a credibility issue, especially if you're teaching students some quite tricky maths concepts, that you should be able to, as a teacher, understand how that works. And I think that's where the subject knowledge is really important, especially now we're talking about, we've brought with the new GCSE, the last revision of the GCSE in 2017, bringing much more A-level topics back into the GCSE. I think there's a need for teachers to have that subject knowledge, which is quite in depth. And when we're then saying about mastery, especially say starting at Key Stage 3, there's a need for a conceptual understanding that's got to be quite high in order to understand what's going on, when actually we're now getting, say, if I look at some of our non-specialists and they work ridiculously hard on their subject knowledge, but that subject knowledge is really, really vital, and that's where it lacks the depth of knowledge for our students if that subject knowledge isn't there.
And where are a lot of these non-specialists coming from? Just basically anybody who's got slack in their timetable? I mean, how does it work, at least at your trust, or how do you sort of see it working in other places?
So I think it varies a lot of the time. It's where teachers who've got slack in their timetables. Initially, if I go back a few years, it used to be a lot of science teachers, which works really nicely in terms of a crossover between the sciences and the maths works in a good way. Whereas now it's coming from quite a variety of subjects. And that's where real subject knowledge training is really important. And schools that invest in those teachers to improve their subject knowledge for maths, a lot of those teachers really enjoy the teaching of the maths compared to some of their other subjects. But that's where the slack is being done, because recruitment for maths is a problem. So therefore class sizes are increasing, the number of sets are decreasing, to try and mitigate some of the need across the trust.
Just want to pick up on the sets. So setting in maths, it doesn't seem to be as, my reading of it, and I'm a history specialist, is that it doesn't seem to be as controversial as in other subjects, the idea about streaming in maths and putting in sets. So why does it seem that setting in maths is so important?
I think it's because, there's a big EEF study taking place at the moment as to whether or not mixed attainment teaching or setting is best in maths, and so the outcome of that will be really fascinating. But I think from looking at it from an experience point of view from maths, is that having too much of a breadth of understanding can hold a lot of students back, or not be able to have the teacher time. And I think that's where it's the important bit, is the teacher time to delve into the concept, and that students feel that it rushes on ahead of them. And that's where maths is a very hierarchical subject, where, as Phil was saying, like, you've got to understand the previous bit to understand the next bit. That's where the problems for students start to go wrong, and that enjoyment starts to drop, is because they've missed something back in, say, year 7, that then unpicks all the way through year 8, year 9, year 10. And actually, we need to be able to have that time to be able to unpick those issues with those students.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because in the surveys that Ofsted conducted in 2023, teachers said the biggest issue was trying to finish the course without allowing for all students to progress. So how do you avoid that?
Yeah, it's the biggest balance we have at the moment. The content requirement, I think, in the curriculum review that's just come out, maths is going to be one of those ones where the amount of curriculum is going to be needed to be reduced, because there is this balance at the moment between, we want to teach for mastery and we want to teach for depth of understanding, but there is a huge amount of curriculum and a huge amount of topics that we need to cover. And you're constantly, as a teacher, weighing this battle of, and I had this conversation today, is it worth me teaching this topic ahead of the GCSE to some year 11s in the next week? Or is it worth me spending that time working and unpicking a different concept? And that's the challenge that teachers are literally facing day in, day out, going, is it better for them to have an understanding of this, or is it better to teach this topic that's separate? And yeah, that's where teachers are at.
I was going to ask, did you come to a decision? Like, what would your thoughts be on that?
So we had a good debate about it today, and we actually looked at the percentage, and this is where it's ridiculous, the chances of it coming up on the paper, looking at the previous papers and what percentage comes up on the papers. And we chose one topic that we thought that actually that's quite high chance for it to come up, therefore it'd be worthwhile spending the time on. And another topic that we had it's probably not worth the time.
Do you put much thought into A level? Like, what are the skills they might need for A level? Or is it very, just because of the way it's done, very fixated on GCSE results? How much thought is put into, okay, well, these are the skills, or do you think the GCSE is quite well matched to what they might need at A-level?
I think we spend quite a bit of time thinking about it, to be honest. Like, especially when you're teaching, say, a group that are going towards grade 7 to grade 9. At my last school, when I was head of maths, we introduced the level 2 further maths qualification as part of the curriculum, so that we could build towards A-level and go beyond the GCSE as a separate qualification, so that students, when they went on to A-level, had that experience beyond the GCSE to help them make that transition from key stage 4 to key stage 5. I'm really passionate about our students wanting to study maths beyond GCSE and onto A-level, and therefore we've built a curriculum so that the students who are going to be going on towards A-level have those step up experiences, so that they can then make that transition. And that's a real purposeful decision, and it's not even a lot of students who have studied for the qualification don't necessarily sit it due to the number of GCSE exams they have to sit, but it gives them that opportunity, having studied it, to then go on to A-level in a better way. And I'm trying to signpost onto things that are now coming into fashion. So there's math schools now, where we can signpost them onto A-levels, but also signing them on towards A-level maths and A-level further maths as well.
So what would you say are the biggest barriers to student progression in maths across the key stages that you're involved with?
Yeah, so I think it is that conceptual understanding, and I think that's where we've been working a lot in terms of the mastery of trying to build in a lot of unpicking for students who haven't traditionally got maths. So where a lot of our students would have naturally succeeded at maths due to the techniques that we've been doing over the last 20, 30 years, 100, 200 years. But where we need to actually unpick now is those students who don't succeed. And maths is a subject for all, and all need to be able to succeed for a good quality of life going forwards. And for a lot of students, the GCSE will be the end of their maths journey. And so we need to make sure that their maths journey finishes well. And therefore, we've got to unpick a lot of the things. So looking at, say, multiple representations, bringing out much more manipulatives that they would use in primary school, which we don't use at the moment in secondary school, and trying to build in a very visual, conceptual, pictorial, abstract kind of model is where we're working on at the moment.
Does it still, or is there still this perception? I went to school in the 90s, of showing my age, that people, for all subjects, maths is the most particular in terms of, well, you just get it or you don't. You've got a maths brain or you don't. Is that going, or is that still an issue, a perception amongst, you see, like with the wider public or parents?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem for us is parents on that. If I sit down at parents' evening, the first thing that a lot of parents will say is, oh, well, I found maths hard. And you're like, oh gosh, this kind of perception of maths being a tricky subject that we're trying to, I think, nationally try and change, but also trying to fight against in a classroom, that no, you will want to enjoy it. And we're trying to get them to an enjoyment out of thinking mathematically and thinking about it. I think that's where things like oracy and things come in really well, is when students get to talk about it and be able to talk through their maths is much easier than trying to suddenly go, right, you're going to sit now in silence and do 100 problems, which is where I grew up doing it. You sit down and you've given a worksheet and off you go. But an actual concept and an understanding of that gives much more enjoyment and much more thrill than sitting there in silence.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, because I was just thinking, as a history teacher, I don't think anybody's ever said to me, well, you just get history or you don't. You have a history brain,
Yeah.
but you still, so you do still tend to get this in maths, don't you? This idea which is interesting. Do you think it's getting any better, or is it still a battle?
I think it's getting a little bit better, but it's still a battle. And I
Yeah.
think it's a battle we're going to face until, I think if you look at, say, Shanghai, Singapore, where maths is highly regarded, I think that's where we need a societal change in order for that to happen. And I think there's green shoots of that happening, where I'm sure we'll go on to talk about A-level in a minute, where much more students are taking A-level maths, that would start to step change it in the next generation, where a lot more students will have studied maths beyond where their parents would have studied.
And so it's the same question I asked Phil. This idea that maths it keeps coming up in all the reports I've read this week. Maths is a communication subject. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I think it's a universal language in maths. And I suppose as we're becoming a much more international society, we want our students to be able to talk through their understanding and get, especially through an oracy type ideas, but also to be able to written communication. When I took my GCSE, there was no marks for how you communicated in your maths. There is now, and you have to, share it in a certain way. Whereas now, I think as well, we're looking at how, if you've got a good understanding of it, you can verbalize it. And that's where we're looking much more in the classroom, is using oracy to say, have these students got a full understanding or not? And I think that's where the communication is coming in. That's where I think we want our students to be able to verbalize the understanding of it, and also using correct mathematical terminology. So where even I would have never used some words, we're now getting our students to talk about commutativity, for example, in Year 7, and distributive laws, and using correct terminology for subtraction and negative numbers, rather than just saying minus this. I think that those words that we're being more specific about is helping the students actually understand the processes that are going on.
And what about my last question to you for the moment, before we go to the next ad break and I bring in A-level? How much do you coordinate with science? Obviously with science, very maths-based, that I could see that some schools, that's a really big part about, I guess, integrating science and maths, because there is that cross-curricular. Is that something you focus on, or is that just a secondary aspect in terms of, well, we just need to get through the curriculum and get good teachers in front of the students?
I think at the moment, I would love to be more integrated with the science curriculum. But at the moment, the amount of content that we need to drive through is just a hindrance to us having those cross-curricular links and building the calculations of science into the maths curriculum. There's just too much content.
Thanks so much, Rob. So we're going to go to our next ad break. When I come back, I'm going to be speaking to Janice Storch about A-level. I'm going to be bringing back Phil and Rob for some final thoughts. So please stay tuned.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit AxiomMaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
So we're back. Thanks so much for sticking with us. So my next guest is Janet Storch, who is going to be talking about A-level maths. Hello, Janice. Are you there?
I am, Dave. Thank you very much for having me.
No problems, Janice. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes, so my name's Janice Storch. I've taught maths in secondary schools across Hampshire and Oxfordshire and Berkshire, and I'm currently the Senior Curriculum Manager at a large sixth form college in Hampshire.
Cool. And do you want to just tell the listeners out there how many students are doing A-level maths and further maths at the moment at the college that we teach at? I should say Janice is one of my colleagues.
Yes, I came from a secondary school in Reading, so it's a little bit different. So we have got over 1,300 students doing maths courses at the moment at the college. So yes, we're doing things on quite a large scale. We're sometimes referred to as a college within a college because of the numbers that we have.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really came up in the research I was doing was that maths has become the most popular A-level subject. So, I mean, that's obviously a good thing. I'd love it if history was the most popular A-level subject, but obviously that sounds fantastic. What are the challenges that brings?
I think it links in with some of the other things that have been discussed in the primary and secondary sectors. I mean, as our numbers grow, then obviously we need to recruit more staff to do that. I think that's possibly slightly easier for us than it is in the other sectors. But we too have done rounds of recruitment where we've had very little in the way of applications at all. So there's that side of things, and then of course it's just it's organisation as well, isn't it? Working with those kinds of numbers.
Yeah, and what about? I just want to touch on subject knowledge at recruitment. How specialised is A-level? Could you take a high school teacher who had done maths, secondary school, teacher who had done maths, and that would be an easy fit for A-level? Is there a particular specificity at A-level that you would require?
I mean, I think ideally it's always nice to have mathematical experience that goes, at least one level beyond what you're teaching. But I think probably one of the changes we've seen is a kind of diversity now in recruitment, that in days gone by where we might have had a department where most, if not all, people would have maths degrees. We are seeing people coming in with different subjects now, such as law or things like that. So I think that's possibly a change.
So law with maths degrees. What about further maths then? I know we've got quite a lot of students doing further maths. I'm assuming that would require incredibly specific maths knowledge.
Yes, I mean that's certainly helpful. I mean, I think as Rob said, where you have staff who don't have the subject specialisms, then we do have staff who work very hard at making sure that their subject expertise is at the level required. But I think it's fair to say that at further maths, most of the staff who would teach that, certainly into the second year, would have quite high levels of mathematical expertise. Yes.
So how do you coordinate with such a massive amount of students coming from so many different providers? So if you have a range of students, just say with a GCSE average of, let's make one up, like 7.3, but they're from 6 to 7 different schools.
Yeah,
Is the 7.3 the same? Like, what are the skills they're coming with? How do you differentiate?
Yes, I think, I mean, our entry level grade is grade 7, so all of our students have grade 7 plus, but we do tend to see quite a range even within that. And so partly that's why we organise our curriculum the way we do, so that in September when they come in, when they join us, we're very much building on what they've done at secondary school, and a lot of the topics that we do in those first few weeks, they will recognise from secondary school, and then we're bringing them on up to the level that we need them to be at, from where they're coming in at. Yeah.
And what is the diversity that you see? Like, the biggest difference you might see in students who have essentially the same GCSE profiles, but are coming from different centres?
I think it's. I think their mathematical experience can be different. Obviously, if they've been taught in schools where there's a high level of mathematical expertise, we've been talking a little bit about that teaching for understanding rather than teaching kind of methods. And so students who have been taught in that way will often find the jump to A level a little bit easier. In terms of students, we every year we see students who maybe haven't had to work that hard at GCSE maths because they're very able students, and then the challenge is to make sure that they're not, because I think at A level it's not just about how easy they find the subject, but it is about spending time working on the subject as well, and ensuring that independently they're completing sufficient practice for fluency in whatever topic they're working on.
So what is the jump from GCSE to A level?
I think it's fair to say that that a lot of students do find it quite challenging. There is a lot of emphasis on making sure, and we've talked about this a little bit earlier as well, but in layout and in how you set out your solutions, and part of that kind of universal nature of the subject is that the way you set out your solutions, following on one line from the next, means that anyone can come in and look at your solution and see what you've done. Whereas sometimes students are much keener to tell you what the answer is rather than what the actual solution is.
Yeah, so in terms of the GCSE profile you're looking at, someone listening might think, wow, like a 7, like that's incredibly high. Why is it that that's the standard that you have decided, well, that's what you really need to do well at A level?
I think it's simply because historically we have seen, and certainly if you look at some of the data, the outcomes, even some of our grade 7 students can find it quite challenging, and the outcomes for grade 6 students tend to mean that it's not necessarily an ideal choice for them.
So in terms of that, how do you ensure progress for all students? If you've got such a wide cohort, you've got different GCSEs, different centres they've come from, how are you able to ensure, okay, the progress they're making? So I imagine students make different progress at different times. How are you able to sort that but ensure that they're all ready for the A-level exams that are obviously very imminent if you're an A-level teacher like we are?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we're particularly blessed with where we are is we've got a very high level of expertise within the team, and we've got a very high level of consistency across the department. So in terms of what's being taught, if you walk along the maths corridor and look at a particular course, you will find that staff are, they're either teaching exactly the same thing at exactly the same time, or they're within a kind of lesson of each other. And I think also the kind of structure of our lessons tends to be quite consistent as well. albeit that every member of staff is kind of delivering it in their own way and in their own style. But the sort of structure of the lesson is quite is very consistent too, and so it's kind of building on the knowledge. So whatever you're introducing, some students, everybody's being taught the same thing, but some students will need a little bit more in the way of scaffolding than other students will.
So what would a A-level lesson look like if I went into one of your lessons, Janice? What are students actually doing in the lesson?
Yeah, well, we were talking about teaching for mastery earlier, weren't we? And we would follow quite closely the kind of Rosenshine for mastery. So, when you go in at the beginning, we'd very often be reviewing what has gone before, and we may be looking ahead to what's coming in the lesson, and then when a new concept is being introduced, then we would tend to start with the teacher modelling, how to approach that kind of a problem, and how to go about it. And then as the lesson goes on, you're very much trying to hand over more and more to the students, so that hopefully by the end of the lesson, they're able to work on quite complex problems by themselves. And one of the things that we make quite a lot of use of is we have whiteboards around the walls. So and the others were talking as well about working collaboratively and discussing problems. And we find that that's a very successful way for encouraging students to talk to each other about how to solve problems and then to present those solutions on the wall.
Yeah. So what is it? I guess I've asked everybody the same question. What does it mean to you when it's said maths is a communication subject?
Yeah, I think I think the phrase has been used before about it being a universal language, and I think that's no understatement, because when you look at someone's mathematical working, even if someone else isn't speaking, say, for example, English as well, they can still look at that and see that. And we can see that with some of our students. We've had a number of students over the years who, for whom English isn't their first language, and their English can be quite limited, but they can look at maths and see the maths, and the bits that they find challenging are where some of the language in the question is much more alien to them. But if you look at their solution to a problem, it's going to look exactly the same as the solution for someone for whom English is their first language.
And this other term that's come up a lot over this evening, teaching for mastery.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that for listeners who might not understand exactly what it means and what it pertains to specifically in maths?
Yeah, I think for us it's echoing what the others have talked about, which is teaching for understanding and showing why things are the way they are, rather than introducing rote methods for how to do things. I think we also feel that we face the challenge of having quite a large amount of content to get through. And I think certainly we too would like to see a little bit of an easing on that, just so that you can explore concepts in a bit more detail and take a little bit more time over things. Again, we too often feel we're rushing to try to get through things, when sometimes we might feel we'd want to delay a little bit to just give students a little bit more practice and a little bit more consolidation.
And would you say, in your experience of what you've seen, that there has been improvement in maths and maths teaching over the years?
I think there's certainly, as the other said, there's much more emphasis on this now, and I think that can only be a good thing. Yes, absolutely.
And what do you put the increase in maths students down to? Is it societal? Is it the idea of, well, maths is a subject that helps you a lot with certain jobs? Obviously there seems to have been a considerable increase in the amount of students doing A-level maths. What would you say is the main reason for that?
Yes, I mean, I think the numbers were up on by about 11% in June 24. I mean, I think certainly there's been a lot more emphasis on how useful it is as a subject. It's sometimes referred to as a facilitating subject, isn't it? It's not a word I like particularly because it makes it sound as if it's only there to serve other subjects when it is, of course, a subject in its own right. But I think it sits very well with lots of other subjects. I mean, you can go down with go down the STEM route and be studying it with things like traditionally chemistry and physics and biology, but it sits very well with other subjects as well. And we have students in our department who do all kinds of subjects with maths. They do it with history and they do it with English and drama and photography. So it sits very well with a lot of things. So I think that's another reason.
I mean, with that many students, is there anything particular that stands out in terms of what they go on to do at university, or is that just impossible? It's just too massive to sort of nail down.
Yeah, I mean, it is very broad, and obviously we have students who go on to do maths and who go on to do a lot of maths related subjects such as engineering and economics and accounting and all those kinds of things. Yes, it is quite broad. Yeah.
And what would you say are the biggest challenges then that you and your teachers face at A-level maths?
I think we've kind of touched on these already. I think as the others said, content is very high, and sometimes feeling that we have to move on a bit earlier than we would like to. And as I say, with some of the students, then it's helping them make that jump so that. Because sometimes at GCSE some students have been able to complete like maths homework quite quickly, and so it's encouraging them to take on board that they probably need to spend as much time outside of the classroom working on their maths as they do inside the classroom working on their maths. So it's encouraging them to do that too.
That's interesting. So I was trying to think through that. Are you saying that there are students who are coming from GCSE who have maybe not found it as challenging, like they can do it, but their practices in terms of the step up are not as embedded? I'm just interested in why that would be the case.
I think we have some students who have found the subject fairly straightforward. I mean, as Rob says, there are some quite challenging concepts at GCSE now, certainly in the higher tier. But I think some of our students have found that quite accessible. And then it's just, as I say, attempting to embed that it's not enough to look at something and find it straightforward. It's spending time on it and looking at all the different scenarios and all the different kind of quirky questions that come up on various topics, to make sure that they have a broad experience of all the different types of scenarios that can arise.
With that, is it just a case of students needing to, I guess I was going to say fail, but not fail, but find the challenge at A-level and realise, is it a case of just over the 2 years they come to that understanding through the fact that they just can't do as well? Do you just see it as a natural progression?
I think it's things like, I mean, we have a fairly structured program in terms of independent learning and work that's done at home. So it's encouraging students to embrace that structure, and it's one of the things that we will keep an eye on from fairly early on, is checking that students are completing all the work that we've asked them to, and that they're doing it in the way that we'd like them to. So it's ongoing, yeah.
That's interesting. And then apart from the content, are there any other improvements in the A-level curriculum that you would like to see, or that you think could improve the nature of maths at A-level?
Yes, I mean, I think, as I say, we'd like to have, I think, a bit more space to do things beyond the content. I mean, at the moment, all of those kinds of things tends to have to take place beyond lesson time. So, if we want to take students to, for example, a maths inspiration show, we'll do that beyond lesson time. And if we want to have speakers in to talk about how they use maths and what they do, we would tend to do that, for example, at lunchtime and things like that. But sometimes I think it would be nice to have the space to explore things a little bit more in class. Whereas we are quite tied with the content.
And what are the sort of things you'd like to explore more? Is it just spending more time in the curriculum or going beyond it? What are the aspects that really interest you?
Yeah, I think it's the going beyond it, having time to think about how people use maths and what they do. There's various programs and things all at the moment. People like Hannah Fry talking about how things work and the kind of maths that she does, and that's one of the things that Maths Inspiration does as well. That's speakers who talk about the maths that they use every day in the roles that they play. And I think also just a little bit of the kind of the sort of joy and wonder of maths as well. The kind of because so much of maths is about patterns and things as well, isn't it? So it's being able to spend a little bit of time on things like that. There are various things like coding competitions. The Cipher Challenge is one of them that University of Southampton runs, and it would be nice to have time to spend a bit of lesson time doing things like that. Whereas those kinds of things tend to take place beyond lessons.
So I'm going to bring Phil and Rob into our conversation now, just for some final thoughts. Thanks so much for that, Janice. That was super interesting. So Phil and Rob, hopefully you're there.
Yep, I'm here.
Yes.
Cool. Right. I'll start with you, Phil. Anything you want to pick up on what Rob and Janice have been saying? Any thoughts?
I mean, what struck me most was the fact that 3 people who kind of oversee maths from the age of 5 to 18 are all very much singing from the same hymn sheet. And when we went to the news after I spoke, I was thinking to myself, I wish I'd mentioned this, I wish I'd mentioned that. But then actually Rob and Janice have mentioned it anyway. So I feel that the leaders of maths across all schools represented here, and hopefully more widely, are very much in alignment, and we're all wanting to achieve the same thing, but more importantly, we all believe that it can be achieved through the same aims, through the same kind of structures and principles.
Yeah, and what about yourself, Rob?
Yeah, I completely agree with Phil there about how nationally I think now there's a lot more collaboration that's going on amongst maths teachers because we're all on that same pattern and we're all starting to sing from the same hymn sheet, really, in terms of where we want maths education to go. I was really struck as well from what Janice was saying as well about recruitment, that it's not just a secondary problem, but it goes all the way through the whole thing as well.
Yeah, I think recruitment's a really interesting one because obviously Janice spoke about it, Rob spoke about it. I guess for you, Phil, it's slightly different. I mean, you're recruiting primary school teachers, but it's that maths expertise that maybe is lacking somewhat. Is that the issue that you're finding that's slightly different to what Rob and Janice were talking about?
It is, and you asked a question earlier about whether subject knowledge trumps something or other. I can't quite remember the phrase.
Oh, it was subject knowledge trumping teaching technique, and whether you could have someone who's just a good teacher, they could teach any subject basically, and that the subject knowledge is secondary.
Absolutely, and I have always advocated within our trust that the leaders of any subject are subject geeks, and I don't use that as a put down. I wear that with a badge of pride myself that I'm a maths geek now, and I think my subject knowledge allows me to lead maths better than if I did not have the subject knowledge. And what we're in terms of recruitment, that problems that we face is maths is very much seen as it's a stepping stone to wider leadership opportunities because it is such an important subject. But actually, what I would like to recruit are people who want to lead maths for the sake of leading maths, because they see it as the great subject that it is. And I think that's the recruitment issue that we face.
And then just very quickly on that, Janice, how do you see it in terms of, because you were talking about recruiting from other subjects, that I guess paradox between subject knowledge and teaching, at A level, how does that play in?
I think it's often easier for people because obviously the level of subject knowledge required at A level, certainly second year A level and further maths, is obviously quite high. So it's certainly easier for staff if they've got a level of expertise beyond what we're teaching. But my experience is that where people feel that they don't have that, they do tend to work very hard at it until they feel that that they have the knowledge that they need to give the students the best possible experience.
So my final question to all three of you, I'll start with you, Phil, but it's the same question for everybody, is if you could ask the government for one thing to help with the teaching of maths, what would it be?
Well, it has been mentioned by both Rob and Janice, and it has been published in the last day or two. I think our curriculum is too big, and I think that a real focus on a narrower curriculum that goes deeper would allow us to take that next step in math learning for our pupils.
Okay, so I guess the trick is, Rob, if you agree with Phil, is there something else you want to add to it?
I think as well is looking at how is the maths that we're delivering really fit for the 21st century as well. So, going forwards where we're looking towards digital exams and things, how does maths fit within that global perspective? I think is really important as well. So the curriculum that we deliver isn't just the same that we've delivered for 200 years, but actually we think really carefully about what we remove or what we add in so that it fits for where the students are going for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get onto it too much now because we've only got 2 minutes left. But I was just thinking, obviously you must get questions about AI and why do we even need to do this when in the future I'll just ask a robot to do it and they'll be able to work it out in, less than a millisecond sort of thing. So, it must be part of that.
That's where the depth of understanding is really important. Like if we could teach AI to do an algorithm to churn out a question, but actually AI can't do the depth of understanding that a human can do. And that's where the conceptual understanding is really important.
So, tricky one to end on, Janice. We've got a narrow curriculum, deeper understanding, 21st century skills. Anything you could add to that? It's okay if you can't, but anything you could add to that?
Well, obviously, I agree with all that's been said before. I mean, I'll mention, because it's not been said, funding. Funding is just an ongoing issue, isn't it? For full resourcing. I mean, when we're teaching our maths lessons, we want to have state-of-the-art resources, and sometimes that can be quite challenging, can't it, in the current climate?
Yeah. So, I think we all agree on that for every subject. So thanks so much to Phil, Janice and Rob. I really appreciate you giving up some of your Friday night. I think it's been a really interesting conversation about, a subject that's so important, so massive, so many students doing it. And I really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. So that is the end of our show. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I'll be back next month, last Friday, as usual. I hope you found that interesting and insightful into a subject that is obviously so important. I'd like to thank our guests again. Have an awesome weekend, and thanks so much for listening.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.